Alright, I'm back with another Destiny 2 video, and this time it's not really about anything going on in the game because I just can't think of a single reason to play right now. I have kind of everything I want and need, so until they introduce something happening, I'm probably going to set it down. I did want to talk because I saw some things going around that I think it was yesterday was the 5-year anniversary of the game, or Bungie splitting from Activision and retaining ownership of the Destiny IP, which continued for many years until they got bought by Sony, which, as we all know, we are in that current era. And it's an interesting time to go and reflect on because it was sort of like the best of times, the worst of times with the game. Back then, there was this kind of push and pull with Activision where it was very clear what Activision wanted out of Bungie. And the early roadmaps we saw that Bungie apparently agreed to during this whole sort of planning phase for what Destiny 2 was going to end up being was the initial idea from Destiny 1 moving into Destiny 2 was release the base game, release 2 DLCs, release an expansion, release 2 DLCs, release a sequel, release 2 DLCs. That was supposed to be the cadence. And this wasn't really like live in the traditional sense with, all the seasons and stuff like that at that point. This was like more DLC was kind of more of a common practice back then than everyone kind of fully chasing after the live model. So that's how it started. And in Destiny 2, obviously, we got Curse of Osiris and Warmind with really long gaps in between them, but they were more substantive than anything else we saw in terms of like the seasonal stuff. Like no one's introducing new planets in seasons, even if they're not the biggest. Like that just isn't a thing. And then where this ultimately led was Activision pouring a whole lot of resources into Bungie and Destiny with 2 different support studios, which worked on Forsaken and then at least the subsequent seasons after that. And that is how we got in the situation of Forsaken being, you could debate if it's the best expansion, but it is at least like the most sizable expansion in terms of the sheer amount of stuff it added, with 2 new zones and dozens of new exotics and the raid, the first dungeon, all of this stuff at a level that we've never seen since. Nowhere even close to that. Oh, they even did PvP maps back then with expansions too. And after that, we started getting seasons where we had these central 3, Black Armory, Season of the Drifter, and Season of Opulence, where the seasons themselves have been matched or surpassed by current seasons. I know everyone likes Black Armory and the Black Armory weapons, but if Forges got released today, everyone would hate them. Very unrewarding in general, really basic kind of stuff. Season of the Drifter, I think people even still recognize was a goofy season and one of the worst we've seen, if not the worst. I would rank it the worst. As much as I appreciated new Gambit maps, I don't think splitting Gambit into normal Gambit and Gambit Prime was a good idea. I think the current iteration of Gambit is the best one. And then we had The Reckoning, the worst activity in Destiny history that was built entirely out of a sense of power creep instead of them actually just nerfing things, which is what they needed to do. I hate that activity so much. It was so bad. And then Opulence. Opulence is sort of the gold standard for Destiny seasons where everyone thinks Menagerie is the best seasonal activity we've ever gotten. I think you can make that argument. I think in some ways the Coil is more interesting, but Menagerie is more expansive, and I think people are maybe a little overly fond of it because of the chest glitch allowed you to focus 7 specific weapons with the right masterwork and stuff at a time when really you were supposed to be getting 1 or 2. And like a 20-minute investment for a round of Menagerie is maybe would have not been looked on as fondly for farming purposes. But the big difference was back then they were doing raids also. Like they did Scourge with Black Armory and what's the one I always forget with the helmet and the guy? I only ran it a couple of times. You know what I'm talking about, but everyone's just gonna spam it in the comments now. All right, I need to look it up. It's gonna bother me. Nope, that didn't work. I put in opulence raid and I got stuff from World of Warcraft. Crown of Sorrow. Oh my god. Okay, leaving that in because I don't edit things. So those were two sizable raids, and that is just not something we come even close to getting in Destiny anymore. We get 2 dungeons a year now, and we get a reprised raid. The reprised raid is free, but the dungeons are $20, which is, people might be more likely to pay $20 for raids, but even that would be a little pushing it, and we used to get those as part of the season. So things have changed, and the idea was, so this is the anniversary of the split, the idea was that essentially what was happening was unsustainable. Even with support studios, what Activision was demanding for these yearly cycles, like always a holiday release, always a huge expansion, and then, at best you would have 2 years of expansions, and then you'd have to do a sequel. And obviously now we are still years and years and years later, and Destiny 2 is still going with no Destiny 3 in sight, which you can debate whether that's good or bad. I think it's kind of bad. But a new sequel every 2 years is like Call of Duty shit. And like even Call of Duty was on a 3-year rotation with different full studios working on them. So to ask that out of Bungie, plus all this yearly live content, even with support, totally understand why that is viewed as not sustainable for them. And why things had to change and a lot of things had to get smaller scale after they left as they figured out how to do this on their own. One of their big changes, obviously, was taking the game free to play. That was one of the first things they did when they were free from Activision. And at the time, that seemed like a really good idea because there's nothing really that hooks you with Destiny than just starting to play Destiny. The gunplay is really good. It feels really good. And there was a lot of content. There was the entire Red War campaign. There was the initial seasons. Like there was the initial expansions. There was a whole lot of content that you could consume when you were actually doing the free-to-play version of the game. However, when Beyond Light came around, that was all deleted. There was the content vault. Everything was thrown inside it, and the free player experience was reduced to a new light quests and a few really random things, prophecy and things like that were just the strike playlists and like the ritual playlists and like nothing that was really a coherent introduction to the game or a good starting point you could point people to. Still like that to this day. Still a massive trouble trying to get people into the game and tell them which expansion to start with. So ultimately, what seemed like a good idea there sort of turned into a bad one. And Bungie's done this weird thing where they're like always celebrating splitting from whoever they had a deal with. Like they seemed pretty excited to leave Microsoft and stop making Halo games. And then they were excited to do, Destiny with Activision, but then they eventually got tired of doing Destiny with Activision and thought that was not a deal that was working out well for them. So they split and they were excited about that. However, we know where this eventually led was to selling to Sony, which seemed very counterintuitive at the time as you were so happy about your independence. Like, why are you selling to Sony? Like, I guess $3.6 billion is good, but it just seemed very odd given how kind of forceful they were about wanting to be independent. We know now that they kind of needed a deal like this, and maybe they didn't know it at the time, but we have this whole reporting that, it was Pete Parsons told them that if they had not done the Sony deal with how bad this year had gone post Lightfall, the entire company may have ceased to exist because of the losses. So, in fact, they did need a partner. It's just a matter of how is this relationship going to go with Sony and what are Sony's demands of Bungie. And it doesn't extend to just Destiny now. It extends to multi-platform IPs. Marathon is the biggest one, and then there's a couple more incubation projects in the works. We'll see which of those fully make it out. But it's kind of a different set of demands now where I don't know if Sony has this like fixed timetable of, this is exactly what you need to do. Like, you can't delay any expansions. You must produce a sequel by this date. It doesn't seem like that. And yet it does seem like Sony really wants and needs Destiny to continue to print a lot of money as a live service, because I'm pretty sure they thought that was like sort of a guarantee when they bought Bungie, was that the live stuff would print money and Bungie would be able to work on other stuff in the interim, other multi-platform live games. And that has not really worked out. So it's kind of a matter of how much leeway Sony is willing to give Bungie. And not that much, because we saw mass layoffs. We saw over 100 people laid off. And we've seen some trimming around other Sony studios too. And they're apparently internally a little concerned about their current model in the larger market, where, they have these really solid, really great single player games, but one-off $70 purchases. They don't have necessarily the equivalent of Game Pass, but they also don't think just putting all their big games on Game Pass is the right idea in the first place. So they're doing this big live thing, which was spearheaded by Bungie and is not going well. So after all this time, after a decade, it's amazing that kind of things have lasted as long as they have. Like, there was all these jokes about the 10-year plan for Destiny, and it launched and it was getting 6 out of 10s, and like everyone was kind of laughing about how dead it was going to be. And here we are 10 years later, it still exists. That said, this does seem to be the kind of most precarious position Bungie has been in a very long time. And we've been over this a lot, but the current situation with the giant revenue miss forecasts and the layoffs, and I've said before, I just don't know what is going to improve in at least the short term here with this delayed season. Even if the final shape is amazing, by its nature, you will see player drop off after that, as it serves as a sort of finale for a giant portion of the game, so people may move on. It's going to be tough going forward. And internally, there's been like, if this is not a mega hit, if we don't turn things around, there will be more layoffs. And you do more layoffs, you can produce less content, and it spirals and spirals and spirals, and it does not seem great. Obviously, we do not hope that happens, and if Marathon comes out and that could be a huge hit, some of their other IPs could really pan out, Destiny could figure out a way to re-engage players. It's been a difficult road during this short Sony lifespan especially, but I think one of the tipping points was the content vault. That really is when things sort of started to wobble significantly, I'd argue. Not that like nothing good has happened in that time. There's been plenty of good things, plenty of good seasons individually. The Witch Queen expansion, I think, is one of the series' best, if not the best. It has the best story. I don't know about content itself. I don't know if you can top Forsaken for the total amount of content and changes it had to the game that made it better. It's just has never really been the same. And the idea of it being a free-to-play game has sort of just gone out the window. We've seen dramatic increases in monetization. We have seen really large fluctuations in quality. And now we've seen actively harmful things happening to the company. So this is a kind of a low point right now for the game and Bungie as a whole, which is not really what you want to see heading into your final expansion. But it's tough because I know the Activision years were better in a lot of ways with, so much support that they were getting and the type of content, the amount of content they were going to produce. But it is also pretty easy to see how the Activision schedule was so brutal and punishing that it was impossible to sustain, not even just with crunch, but like it just didn't even seem remotely possible. The original plan, I think, was just Destiny 1 expansion, Destiny 2 expansion, like that was wild. And then it changed to 2 expansions and then a sequel. But like, I do not blame Bungie for wanting to get away from that. And obviously we know a lot of other really bad things about Activision and all these bad decisions Bobby Kotick has made. And like, there are plenty of reasons I can think you would want to get out of Activision besides that. And I don't really fully understand the Sony thing. It in some ways it feels like out of necessity. In other ways, it just seems like, getting that bag, like paying $3.6 billion for a company that is one active game. That is a good game. It's a pretty big game, but that's a lot of money for one game. And like part of the expectation was Bungie teaching other people how to do live service stuff. And it's still pretty early, but things are not going well with the canceled Uncharted multiplayer game, and we'll see what happens with the rest. But yeah, that's not a full recap. I apologize if I got my timelines wrong in any of that, and one thing was before another. It's been a long time, and I can't always fully remember, and I always forget the name of Crown of Sorrow. Always forget that. I don't know why, but so yeah, so it's interesting to reflect on this and kind of see where we've come from and see all the different challenges along the way. I don't know what the best era of Destiny has been. Everyone kind of has their own opinion. I think a lot of like the really nostalgic people believe the Taken King was the kind of peak of the series, which was really early on. And I get that was probably like the most exciting time with the raid race and stuff like that, and how much the Taken King kind of transformed the game. It is hard not to think of the Forsaken initial seasons era as really good, with just tremendous amounts of content dropped in Forsaken, and then really, solid seasons, or, at the time what were considered solid seasons with raids and stuff. And then after that, things get a little more murky, and you can pick and choose which moments you like, but I think it's a little harder to pinpoint exactly, some sort of peak there. Witch Queen, out of all the past years since Forsaken, I would say has probably been the peak, and then there are some individual seasons that I would say are really good. Seraph, the season, I really liked Season of the Witch. I thought that was a great season, but it's a little more pick and choose, and it's not really like a full era of the game. It's like the game is good for 2 months, and then it's like whatever for a while. I don't know. Let me know what your great era is that you like, but. Anyway, I'm off to read some more Suicide Squad NDA'd alpha impressions, and maybe I'll have a video about that tomorrow or something, but definitely going to run low on Destiny topics here, so I might have to, when Suicide Squad comes out, I probably will transition into doing mostly Suicide Squad videos for a good amount of time in between anything there is to talk about with Destiny, given that there's not a whole lot else coming out this winter that I want to play, and I really hope it goes well. I hope it's a game I can invest a lot of time into, but like even failure games, I still put 300 hours into Marvel's Avengers, which may seem insane to some people, but there were aspects of that game I really loved. And if Suicide Squad is that, but a lot better, that would be great, and I would be very excited. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.